how do I balance investing while paying off student loans? How do I know if I'm on an income-driven plan? Who would be looking at the WRAP plan versus some of these other income-driven repayment plans? How do I know how and when to recertify my income? What do you guys think about PSLF? Is it still safe? And if they don't know if their employer qualifies for PSLF, what's a quick, easy way to find out? All right, guys, we are going to do a student loan Q&A. I have with me Kaitlin Hile. She is a cardiology clinical pharmacy specialist, and she has actually undergone specialty training on federal student loans specifically. She is the Millionaires in Medicine in-house student loan expert, and she is going to give us all of the answers tonight on the student loan questions that you have been asking. So thank you in advance for joining us, Kaitlin.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Of course. So I have a list of questions. If it is okay with you, I will start walking through them and we can just kind of see where things lead.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Question 1. If I wanted to be semi-aggressive with loans after a 401k match and my Roth IRA, should I FI my $130,000 in student loans for 5 years? So I'm thinking this person means on a 5-year term, or keep my refi on a 7 to 10-year term. My interest rates are currently 6.5% to 9%.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack with that question. That's a very good question. I think there's a lot of layers to it. So one of the parts of that question was basically, should I take my federal student loans and make them private student loans? Now, there's quite a few things to consider when you're weighing that decision. One of which is if you need access to any of the federal forgiveness programs like public service loan forgiveness or even taxable loan forgiveness. Or if you need the option to go into deferment, things like that, are only available for federal student loans. Once you go to private, you lose access to all of that. So that's an important consideration. You also need to think about what happens if you were to pass away. Federal student loans would be discharged tax-free, whereas private student loans may fall to your spouse or your co-signer, maybe a parent. So that's an important consideration as well. So you can't just think about the interest rate when comparing federal and private student loans. Now, the other piece that this person was considering was, I think it sounds like a 5-year term for their private student loans. To pay off $130K in 5 years, that's going to be a pretty hefty monthly payment, right? And if you lock yourself into a 5-year term, you're locking yourself into that high payment, which is going to make it hard to hit your other financial goals. Now, I know this person mentioned, hey, I'm already doing a 401k match. I'm already maxing out my Roth IRA, which is a really good start to investing. But Kristen, I think you would agree that that's probably not going to be sufficient from an investing standpoint to hit traditional retirement goals, let alone if you want to be reducing work hours and having that early retirement that so many of healthcare professionals that we talk to are dreaming of. And so what I wouldn't want you to do is lock yourself into these really, really high monthly student loan payments to knock that out in 5 years and then not have any extra cash flow to build up an emergency fund, to invest to those early retirement goals that maybe you also have, or to be able to travel and do other things like that as well. And so I do worry that a 5-year term is really going to minimize your options in other areas of your financial life. What are your thoughts
I agree
on that?
completely. Yeah, I'd say absolutely not. Do not do a 5-year term. You have a lot of downside and very little upside. In
Yeah.
this category of debt, like private student loans, it's exceedingly uncommon for you to have prepayment penalties. And so what will likely happen is you'll refinance on a 10-year term. You can pay it off in 7 years if you want. You can pay it off in 5 years if you want. There'll be no penalty to you, again, for the vast majority of private student loans for doing that. And so you still have the ability to save the interest if you want to take that accelerated approach. But if you refinance to the 5-year term, well, now you have to, which is a whole different thing. And so for absolutely, I would not shrink the term beyond 10 years if you are certain that refinancing is even a good idea, which as Kaitlin mentioned, it may not be. And so really be careful. Anytime you're taking federal student loans and making them private, you should not, I don't think you should do that in isolation without a conversation with someone else. You need to have the understanding of what all of your student loan options are, what PSLF would look like if you did, National Health Service Corps or some other type of repayment program, what that would look like, what taxable loan forgiveness would look like. And you need to know the total cost of repayment with all of those different structures so that you can definitively know that the only path for you is going to be standard or accelerated. Because once you make the refinance move, that's it. You're like,
There's no
you close
turn
all
back.
the other doors.
Right. It is a measure twice, cut once situation. And I would say like measure 3 to 5 times, cut once
Yeah.
situation. Because, yeah, once you do that refinance, there is no back reverse option. You're locked in on the private student loans now. So you really need to talk with an expert that can look at your entire financial situation first to make a well informed decision with that.
Right. Now, actually, someone else asked, how do I balance investing while paying off student loans? Which is kind of what this initial question leads into as well, because their thought was, hey, if I'm doing my K match and I'm maxing out a Roth IRA, they're inferring like, is it cool if anything above that I pay extra to my student loan debt? Is basically what they're saying. I have a strong opinion about that, Kaitlin. Do you have any thoughts first?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you have to begin with the end in mind. What is your end goal? For some people, they can't see past the goal of like, I just want to be debt free because they feel that day in and day out, right? As they log into Nelnet or Mohella and they see this glaring number staring at them every single month. But what they're not seeing is the opportunity cost of what they could be investing and what that retirement's going to look like. That feels like such a far off problem, right? Retirement feels like this like figment of our imagination of like, well, that'll be a problem for future Kaitlin. Right now, I don't need to worry about that. But all of us also in the same breath, we're like, oh yeah, I don't want to work full time till 65. That sounds kind of terrible right now. And so it's like we have these two thought processes that aren't in alignment, right? We know we don't want to work full time until 65 or 67, but then we're not prioritizing what needs to be done to make an alternative reality happen. So I would think about first and foremost, what do you want that retirement to look like? Maybe you're somebody that just wants to drop to like 0.5 FTE, work 2 to 3 days a week or something like that, and do that until 65. Or maybe you're somebody that's like, no, I want to be fully work optional. I want to be in Europe 3 months out of the year, starting at 55. Maybe that's the vision, but you can't figure out how to piece everything together until you know what you're actually working towards.
That vision sounds nice, by the way.
Yeah.
But yes, I totally agree. I think you have to first ask yourself, what does my lifestyle vision require of me from an investing standpoint? Until you actually answer that question, you really can't figure out the rest because, well, spoiler alert, the 401k match in a Roth IRA doesn't even create you being able to work full time and retire at 67. It doesn't create that. It creates you being Social Security dependent in the future and taking big lifestyle cuts. And so I would say, heavens no, don't take the approach of Roth IRA's maxed, check. I put 4% in my 401k. I'm cool. I'm going to be focused on my student loans now because that mistake will cost you dearly down the line, even just to retire and maintain your standard of living. But what we see even more often is what Kaitlin mentioned. People who want to do something different, want to be able to reduce hours. Kaitlin said like be a 0.5 FTE. If you don't know what that is, FTE is full-time equivalent. And it's what your employer would define as a full-time employee is a 1.0 FTE. So when we say like 0.5 FTE, we're saying half time or 0.7, that would be almost 3/4 time, just for reference. So you might want to be like part-time or have fewer hours. Well, all of that stuff requires you to really front load your portfolio. Well, it's hard to do two things at once. So if you're putting all of your money into student loan debt, it's really hard to be entirely front loading your portfolio as well. And that's only talking about the stock bond investing, right? Like maybe you want to approach your financial independence from a cash flow standpoint. Well, it's pretty hard to go buy the first rental property if you can't scrounge up a down payment because all of your money is going to student loan debt. So there is this like ebb and flow and this opportunity cost that comes from accelerated loan repayment. Now, I'm not against it. You guys know I paid off my $161,000 in student loan debt in 16 months. Kind of insane. Kaitlin, you also paid off your loans in much less than the standard 10-year term. But I think we both are just saying recognize there's a cost. And if you can't tell us, if you can't delineate hey, my investing system will create financial independence at X, then you're not ready. You're not in a position to take the accelerated student loan repayment path because you don't know what it's costing you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we know that your early investing years matter the most. And the majority of us spent our 20s and early 30s in school, right? We are already in PA school or pharmacy school. We might be pursuing a residency. So we've already missed a lot of those like golden investing years that our colleagues were able to take advantage of. So if you spend another 5 years when you start that new position, your first position as a PA or a pharmacist, and you spend that first 5 years solely focused on paying off student loan debt, well, now we've missed 5 more years of potential compounding interest and compounding growth. So if the longer you kick that can down the road, it gets much, much harder to make up for that on the back end.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So, question 3, what is up with the new income driven plan?
That's a good question. There's a lot up with it. There's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years. It's been making, I think, everybody's head spin, myself included, trying to keep up with all of these policy changes. Let me try to break down some of the key changes that are happening. So the SAVE plan, you can still be in forbearance right now. They haven't announced a firm deadline in which you will have to leave that, but it's coming soon. So you need to be thinking about your exit strategy here. So go ahead and kind of cross the SAVE plan off your list of options. We'll take that one out of the equation here. The repayment assistance plan, or the RAP plan, that one should be going live sometime this summer. They're predicting the July 1st. I'll believe it when I see it, right? Sometime this summer. So that one's the new one that came with the one big beautiful bill that passed last July. That'll be a new repayment plan. And then we still have the income-based repayment plan, which is abbreviated IBR. That one remains available. And the pay plan remains available until summer of 2028. And then that one will kind of be sunsetted at that time. The ICR plan will also sunset in summer of 2028, but that one's not a very good option, so we don't spend a ton of time talking about it.
So, give me like just very broad stroke. Who would be looking at the RAP plan versus some of these other income driven repayment plans?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If you did not have a federal student loan balance on July 1st of 2014, then you would be considered a new borrower on the IBR plan, which means your monthly payment is 10% of your discretionary income. Now, if you did have a federal student loan balance on that day, it's going to be 15% of your discretionary income, which they call you an old borrower. I know it's kind of a rude term, but all that means is you pay a higher amount. So if you fall into that old borrower cutoff, the RAP plan may be more beneficial for you, but we've got to run the numbers to know for sure. The RAP plan is calculated slightly differently than the other income-driven repayment plans. Your monthly payment is a percentage based on a sliding scale of your AGI, or adjusted gross income, if you're not familiar with that term. So for folks, maybe if you're in like a residency or something like that, and you have a lower AGI during that time frame, the RAP plan may actually be really helpful to you. But for most healthcare professionals, your AGI will be above $100,000, which means your payment on the RAP plan would be 10% of your AGI, not discretionary income. And I know this starts to get like really nitty gritty on how we do these calculations. And honestly, I don't expect anybody to learn all of these details themselves. Like, it's hard. There's so much nuance to it, but that's why you need to lean on the people who have spent the time getting into the weeds on all of this, because it is overwhelming and it feels a lot like alphabet soup when you first start looking at all of these plans.
Yep. So y'all, coming to you July 2026, we've got the RAP plan. And if you're keeping tabs on the Trump news, we also have the Trump accounts. The online portal is supposed to open for your Trump kiddo account July 2026 as well. So a couple of things coming to you from good old Donald Trump this summer. All right, let me see. We got another question here. How do I know how and when to recertify my income?
Ooh, that's a good one. So you have to recertify your income annually if you're on an income-driven repayment plan. So all of those different abbreviations we were just talking about, RAP, IBR, PAY, ICR, Those are all different types of income-driven repayment plans. If you're on any of those, you have to recertify your income annually. Now, that might be news to a lot of people listening because you hadn't had to do that for a long time due to COVID and all of the other kind of things that have been up in the air lately with student loans. But moving forward, annual recertification of your income. Now, there's two main ways that you can recertify your income. You can use your last filed tax return, or you can use your pay stub from the last 90 days. That's actually a really important decision of which of those two options you choose. If you use your last filed tax return, they subtract out all of your pre-tax investments. So if you're contributing to your 401k or your HSA, things like that, you get to decrease your student loan payment as well. But if you use your pay stub from the last 90 days, they don't count that. And so it's actually a very nuanced decision of what's going to give you the lowest monthly payment. And a lot of people don't even know to consider those options. So that's kind of what you need to be thinking about when you go to recertify your income. And notice I said the last filed tax return. So right around like this time of year, people have a really interesting decision to make. Should I recertify my income maybe a month or two early so I can use my 2024 tax return? Or should I go ahead and file my 2025 taxes and then recertify my income? And you can, depending on where you're at in your career and what that income has looked like from year to year, it can be a dramatic change in your monthly payment.
Yes. Okay. If people are overwhelmed and their brain is going to sleep with the alphabet soup, pay attention to what you just said. You can artificially lower your income and lower your monthly payment if you are investing in pre-tax things. Okay. FB, HSA, FSA, not an investment, but you see my point. That will lower your student loan payment if you are using your filed tax return to recertify your income. So pay attention. These little things, they sound so stupid, but it's how the game is played. And it's how some people pay a lot less in their overall student loan repayment plan than other people who have no idea that there's all these little hacks to the system.
But yeah, the more you know, the more you're like, "Oh, I could lower my payment in that way. I could lower my payment in this way." And, we haven't even talked about your tax filing status for married couples, but my goodness, is that an important decision when you can just how you change your tax filing status, you could cut your monthly payment in half from a federal student loan payment. I mean, it can be a dramatic change, but you've got to know to think about all of these different things and how they interplay.
Yeah, honestly, trying to figure out the federal tax situation for two high income earners that both have federal student loans, it's like most people would rather learn the Krebs cycle because honestly, it is like equally as confusing.
Yeah, that's actually a very good comparison. I would put it on that level. Yeah.
All right, one second. I've got a couple more questions. Let me get them pulled up. Okay. How do I know if I'm on an income driven plan?
So the best way to know what monthly or what plan you're on overall, you can log into your student loan servicer. So maybe that's Nelnet or Mohella or one of the alternatives. You can also log in directly to the federal student aid website, and it will tell you when it shows you like this is your monthly payment, this is your interest rate. It should tell you exactly what plan you're on. And so like for example, it might say pay as you earn. That means you're on the pay plan because that's what pay stands for, right? And so it should tell you exactly which one you're on. And if you're not sure, like this is why you can work with those who have specialized in student loans and they can kind of walk you through exactly what to look for and what that actually means.
Yeah, you have to know this stuff. This is like so important. And I get that like we're all busy and we have a lot of other things on our plate, but you really have to understand like what payment plan you're on and what the long-term ramifications are. I always say if you don't have an income plan, an investing plan, and a student loan plan, you don't have a money plan. All three of them have to go together. And so knowing like what student loan payment plan you're on and what that pains for you in the future is so important. We had one couple actually came into our coaching program. They were on an income-driven repayment plan. One spouse was with a non-qualifying employer. And that had been the case for a really long time. And so they were actually on a taxable loan forgiveness path, but they were not aware of that. And they were not aware that they were going to have a multi-five-figure, might have even been, was it six-figure, Kaitlin? Six-figure tax bill?
Yeah, over
And that was
100.
coming in just a few years, just like, what was it, 5 years or something?
Yeah.
They actually were totally unaware that that was going to come because they didn't know that they were pursuing taxable loan forgiveness, which is so common. I mean, this is literally so common where medical professionals will ride one of these income driven repayment plans because the payment's lower, it feels more affordable, it feels like the right move, but they don't have a qualifying employer for PSLF and they have no idea. Depending on the student loan balance, you might have a huge amount of money forgiven and taxed as ordinary income at the end of the road.
Let me break that down in a little bit more detail because I'm sure a lot of people had this internal panic when you told that. It's like, oh my gosh, wait, what am I going to owe? What Kristen was saying is if you're on an income driven repayment plan, you have two options here. You're either pursuing public service loan forgiveness, and to do that, you need to be at a qualifying employer, or you're pursuing taxable loan forgiveness. Now, PSLF, you make qualifying payments for 10 years at your qualifying employer, and your remaining student loan balance is forgiven tax-free. Tax-free. It's incredible. Taxable loan forgiveness, hence the name, not quite so lucky, right? You make qualifying payments on that income-driven repayment plan for somewhere between 20 and 30 years, depending on the plan. At that time, your remaining student loan balance is forgiven, but the amount that's forgiven is treated as ordinary income. So if you have $200,000 forgiven in student loan debt and you're like, woohoo, this is awesome. And then you go to file your taxes that year, it's as if you earned an additional $200,000. They want you to pay taxes on that, right? So I'm just going to throw out a number, ballpark, you owe like $60,000 that year. That's not going to be a good phone call with your CPA, right? When they're like, and you actually owe 60 grand this year. But a lot of people just have no idea that they're headed down the taxable loan forgiveness pathway because they just fill out the application that says, what's your main goal? And you hit lowest monthly payment because that sounds nice, right? But you don't realize what the downstream ramifications of that are. And I cannot even count how many people we have worked with that didn't realize that's where they were headed. The story Kristen told, they were still like 4 years away from that taxable loan forgiveness and they were going to owe over $100,000. Can you imagine finding out? I mean, at least they had a 4-year notice, right? Can you imagine if you just filed your taxes and you owed 100 grand? That's nauseating, but that happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, for taxable loan forgiveness, every once in a while, it will be the best path. It's really uncommon for PAs and for NPs because there are so many qualifying employers for public service loan forgiveness that you can usually earn a really high income while taking the PSLF path and getting all of your forgiveness tax free. But in some professions, like for example, we've worked with dentists who taxable loan forgiveness was the best option for them because it was an intentional choice. Then we're making really strategic decisions about how do we prepare for the tax bill and how do we make sure that we're maximizing those dollars over the next, 20 years as we anticipate, we know there's going to be this big tax bill at the end. So what's the best way to use the money between now and then so that we can earn the most we can while being conservative enough to recognize we need to have that money there for the bill. And so, it's not always bad to be on taxable loan forgiveness or to be pursuing that path, I should say, but it should be a very intentional decision with a plan for the tax bill. And most folks just kind of wander their way into it.
Yeah. I think if you're on an income driven repayment plan and you're not at a PSLF qualifying employer, you should have like an alarm going off in your head right now of like, oh, I need to run these numbers. I need to know if that's actually the best plan for me. And if it is, I need to know what tax bill I need to be preparing for and how to do so. So hopefully that at least gives you
Yes.
a little bit of an alarm bell of, I need to act here and make sure that this is actually the right plan.
And if they don't know if their employer qualifies for PSLF, what's a quick, easy way to find out?
If you Google PSLF employer eligibility, the Federal Student Aid website actually has a search tool that you can use. It's going to ask you for the company's EIN number. That is like a business's social security number. And if you're like, well, I don't know what my company's is, you can either find it on your W-2 or you can just Google like the name. Let's say you work at the University of Iowa. You can just Google University of Iowa EIN and it'll come right up on Google. You can find that very easily. So you'll put that into the search tool and it will tell you if it's a PSLF qualifying employer. So you can know if you're on the job hunt, you can check any potential employers to see if they qualify and make really well-informed decisions with that.
Yes, I do really recommend you locating an EIN and checking that way because it is very common that, for example, you may work at a hospital, but The employer itself may be like insert X hospital physician network, which might
Yeah.
be a different entity than the hospital itself. And so, just to make sure that you're working with completely accurate data, I do recommend looking to find an EIN on your W 2 so you make sure, like, hey, this is the real, the person who actually writes the paychecks. What is their EIN? And are they qualifying? So that you don't get tripped up where you think, well, I work at this hospital, the hospital's a nonprofit, but then behind the scenes, your employer is not. So be careful. The EIN is the best way if you're not certain.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's common for physician groups or PAs and Ps that may be working for a provider group that is contracted with a hospital. A little bit less common to see that structure in the pharmacy world, but certainly still possible.
Okay, last question we're going to take. What do you guys think about PSLF? Is it still safe?
Yeah, so I think it is at this time. We have not seen any red flags that would make us think PSLF is going to be on the chopping block. In fact, it's actually a very popular program across the country, really on both sides of the Republicans, Democrats. A lot of folks agree that PSLF is very important for those in public service, not just for healthcare professionals, right? Like PSLF applies to social workers and teachers and all sorts of other professions where that debt to income ratio can be really challenging. So there's been no changes to PSLF really at this time. I think the way that the government has kind of mitigated the downsides of how much they would have to be paying out in terms of PSLF is some of their new changes to borrowing limits. And that will affect new borrowers moving forward. And I think that's kind of how they're inadvertently impacting PSLF. So they're not having to write as big of a check to forgive large balances down the road while still keeping that really important program afloat. So we've seen no changes that would make us say, hey, PSLF is going to, be impacted. It's really about making sure from a borrowing limit standpoint for those new folks starting school, they would have less of a benefit from PSLF moving forward. I hope that distinction makes
Yes,
sense.
you're exactly right. Yes, PSLF is a huge expense to the federal government. And I do think in medicine, we tend to forget that this is like widely applicable across professions and not just for us because we talk about it so much. But it is, as of now, it's still safe, it's still in play. As you mentioned, the big thing that's changing it isn't PSLF itself, it's the fact that people are not going to be able to accumulate
Mhm.
$300,000 of federal student loan debt to become a PA, where, that might have been the case before. And so that will intrinsically limit the expense of PSLF because if you do wind up with $300,000 in student loan debt as a PA, a good chunk of that will be private, which, as we kind of said at the beginning, doesn't have those options, right? Like you don't have those forgiveness options. Depending on the lender, you have very few options for in terms of hardship or any income driven anything. And so they're basically shifting a lot of that out of the federal student loan system and into the private sector. We could talk about that for a whole nother day, but at least for now, for those of you who are in practice or actively taking out student loans and towards the end of your training, it seems very likely that PSLF will still be an option for you.
And hopefully you'll find it reassuring to hear that they're still processing thousands of PSLF applications and approving those every month. So even though we've seen like processing times being really delayed overall for student loan applications and IDR applications, PSLF applications are still going through. They are still getting approved. People are seeing that tax-free forgiveness come through. So lots of exciting progress there. I hope that's also reassuring to people that are currently pursuing PSLF.
Yeah, I think personally, the biggest risk is not that you're not going to be able to execute PSLF on the government side. I think the biggest risk is making sure that you're comfortable maintaining a qualifying employer and working full time for the 120 payments that are required.
Yeah, it's definitely an important factor to consider kind of where you plan on working. You don't have to stay at the same employer the whole 10 years. You can move between qualifying employers, so you're not locked into the same exact job. But if you're 7 years into PSLF and we've been working that whole time to have you pay as little as possible and get credit for it, and then you say, you know what, I'm going to go to a private employer, that really changes the student loan landscape for you because we've just spent the last 7 years minimizing those payments, but accruing interest, right, with the anticipation of tax-free forgiveness. So once you go down the PSLF pathway, we can optimize the heck out of that pathway, but you really got to stick with it.
Yeah, and you do have to be willing to commit to the 120 payments. Although I guess as I sit and think about it, it's not even as though you're trapped in medicine for the 120 payments, right? Like you could leave, you could go get a job as a teacher. Your income driven repayment monthly bill would go down and your loans would still get forgiven. So there are options. There's always a way.
Absolutely. And you can even do like part time at two different qualifying employers to add up the appropriate number of hours. So there's a lot of ways to get the job done. It's really just if you're dedicated to pursuing it and willing to take that extra step to make sure your employer is qualifying.
Yep. And if you have a debt to income ratio that's above 2 to 1, meaning like, let's say you earn 150K, but you owe 300K in student loan debt, 2 to 1 ratio, PSLF is going to save you a life changing amount of money most of the time. We're talking 6 figures. And so it's not something that you should take lightly, the decision of whether or not to pursue. The higher the debt to income ratio, the more important it becomes to get that tax free forgiveness. And so the more you do want to sit down and go, okay, how can I get creative? How can I find a job that I love that has decent hours, decent work life balance, and still make sure that I'm going to be at that qualifying employer? Because at that point, for you to overcome the additional cost of student loan repayment, you're going to have to switch to a private sector job that pays a lot more in order for that to make financial sense. And so if your options are, hey, I'm going to stay at this PSLF position, make 145, 150,000 a year, or I could hop over here to this private sector job and make 170, but pay an extra $200,000 in student loan repayment, it doesn't make sense. Your break-even point's way, 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 way off in the future. So those kind of conversations get really intentional and need to have math behind them before you can start making job decisions that actually make sense when you do have a very high debt to income ratio situation.
Yeah, that if you have a debt to income ratio over 2 to 1 and you haven't had either you've mapped out all of your student loan options in detail or you haven't consulted somebody that can help you with that, it's really a missed opportunity because we're talking, multiple 6 figures that can be on the line. So really, really important aspects of your decision making.
All right, y'all. Well, I hope this has been super helpful. We'll do a couple more episodes like this. We'll space them out every few months where we just take questions from you guys and then sit down and answer them so that if you're sitting there nervous about your student loan debt, you have a resource you can go to get some of this sorted out and feel a little bit more at peace that you know what the heck you're doing.
Absolutely. That's what we're here for.
Thanks, Kaitlin. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.